Okay, so apparently I cannot do this entire chapter in two 15-minute sessions. So here's part three, and I'm so sorry. This one talks all about intelligence, however. So the last, I guess, part two concentrated mostly on language. Part one was mostly on cognition, and so at least it's separating itself pretty nicely. So. Um, what is intelligence? All right. Intelligence, basically, as the book says, are abilities that enable you to adapt to your environment and behave in a goal-directed way. Which, what does that even mean? That's such a really strange definition that's not very clear. Um, and how do you even measure that, right? You can't. So, people have tried to measure intelligence for as long as they've defined intelligence. The first one back in the 1850s-ish time period, Sir Francis Galton. He believed that intelligence was inherited. So, if your mom was smart, you're smart. If your dad was smart, you're smart. He also associated it with physical abilities. So if you're smart, you were also strong, or if you're smart, you're also fast. He measured it by reaction time and how strong and good your eyesight was. Obviously, that has nothing to do with it, so research never supported that. Then came Alfred Binet in 1904. He was tasked, along with another psychiatrist, Theodore Simon, to develop intelligence systems for a French school, basically to ultimately decide who and who isn't worth their time and money to educate. Um, so they felt like intelligence is the capacity to find and maintain purpose, adapt and evaluate strategy to reach purpose, and adjust if necessary. They also came up with the concept of mental age. So, mental age was based on if this 6-year-old could answer questions that a 10-year-old should know, then his actual mental age is 10, not 6. Um, in 1916, Louis Terman came and kind of disassembled the study that Binet had done, and he did an American revision of it. So he bastardized it, basically. But it kind of turned into the very first known standardized test that is taken in schools and, yada yada. So, he hated the idea of just a mental age. So what he did is he came up with a formula for something called the intelligence quotient, which is IQ. So basically, the formula for an IQ is your mental age divided by your actual age times 100. So if this 6-year-old had the mental age of 10, it would be 10 divided by 6 times 100, and that would be the IQ. And then we've got David Weschler, who developed intelligence scales to test the shortcomings of Terman's revision of Binet and Simone's study. So he basically was mad because one number cannot explain intelligence. So if you're taking these standardized tests, then you got the score of, 267, or if your IQ is really 130. He says that that cannot define intelligence. And he had a problem with the idea of mental age for adults because what do 40-year-olds know that 35-year-olds don't? That has nothing to do with experience, right? So basically, adults kind of, we've got the full grown brains and we've got the capacity to learn, but we also understand what we understand. And that could mean that we understand some 100-year-old concepts and we could understand some 20-year-old concepts. So he hated that idea. And instead, he wanted to come up with an adult intelligence test. That's on page 333 in your book. It's like a whole page of a chart. And it's just really fun to take, honestly. It measures a whole bunch of different abilities. And he came up with a scale of numbers where your average adults are going to be. He also has a preschool test that is still used today. And then he's got one for children and one for adults that are over the age of 15. So he really broke it down because he was really angry apparently about the mental age. Maybe he didn't test as high as he wanted to. What makes a good intelligence test? It has to have three things. It has to have reliability. So your test has to yield consistent measurements for the same person over time. It has to be valid. It has to have validity. So that means that the test measures what it's designed to measure. So again, that's really hard in intelligence tests because good eyesight does not make you smart. So the third thing is cultural bias. So the degree to which the test is invalid for minority members, because again, different cultures learn different things and value different things. So their intelligence, while it's, could be off the charts, is going to look different than the majority. So this is pretty ironic here, this guy's name, E.G. Boring. He decided that intelligence is what the tests test. I know. So, but he couldn't figure out anything really more than that. So he actually spent more time measuring than he spent defining intelligence. So my guess is he did not have a good time. Then we've got our good friend Charles Spearman, who thought that there's only one level of intelligence that underlies separate mental abilities, and he called it the G factor. He generalized the idea of intelligence, and the G determines how well individuals functioned on cognitive tests. This is all on page 339 in your book, by the way. Then we've got Thurstone, who said that intelligence is actually made of 7 distinct mental abilities. And then Raymond Cattell thought that there were 2 forms of G's. Remember, G equals generalized. So he thought, sorry, generalized intelligence. He thought that there was crystallized intelligence, which is an accumulation of knowledge, and it continues into adulthood. And then he also thought there was fluid intelligence. And so that's more of like how fast you can solve problems and how efficient you are with new information, and how it decreases across adulthood. Then we've got my main man, Howard Gardner. So this is something we had to study a lot in intelligence, or sorry, in education, were his 7 different intelligences. So Back when I was in school, you could be a visual learner, an auditory learner, or a kinesthetic learner. And those were the three categories of intelligence. However, when I went to school to get my teaching degree, we learned that there is actually musical intelligence, mathematical intelligence, visual intelligence, spatial intelligence, memory-based intelligence, all sorts of things. Um, so he said that intelligence is a biophysical potential to process information that can be activated in cultural setting or to solve problems or create products that are of cultural value. So he actually has 9 different intelligences, and teachers are supposed to teach to all of them. So that makes things really interesting, especially for those of you that have musical intelligence. It means I need to sing these answers to you. So we'll see what happens. um, and then, okay, so all of his multiple intelligences are listed on page 339. But there's linguistic, spatial, logical, which is mathematical, musical, kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalistic, and existential. Then we've got the triarchic. This is another really fun word to say. Hierarchically, and now there's triarchic. So triarchic theory of intelligence. This is probably on the test. But basically, it helps us function. He thinks that intelligence helps us function in the world, basically. Um, he says that we have analytical intelligence, and that's the ability to use logic and reason. We have a practical intelligence, and that's the ability to adapt to your environment. And it also is like common sense. And then there's a creative intelligence, which is the ability to use knowledge of the world in novel situations. So things that you're not used to seeing. We've got Daniel Goleman's theory of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is a whole different scale and test. Emotional intelligence has to do with how well you can control your emotions. I don't know if any of you have ever Googled, to take these tests. You can take any of these tests online for free, and it's just fun. But basically, it's all about um, understanding your emotions, using them at practical times, and controlling them. Then we've got the idea of nature versus nurture for intelligence. So in the book, it talks about like twins, identical twins, and how they develop intelligence at the exact same rate. One of the crash course videos talks about an adopted son growing up at the same time and same rate in this house and where his intelligence is. But basically, the answer is yes. It's both. It is genes and environment. It is nature and nurture that contributes to our intelligence. Um, we have the bell curve, which, if you remember from science or math, means that most IQ ranges of a bell curve are going to fall in the middle. So basically, we're mostly average, and that's fine. It's different across racial groups, but the book doesn't really get into that too much. And last slide here. um, so this one's about gender. Are we really that different? Um, eh. Differences tend to be pretty small, and they vary across cultures, but gender really doesn't have much to do. Most of that is a myth. If you have questions, come see me Friday at 3 o'clock for our midterm review, and I will have all of the answers for you. Thanks for tuning in. See you later.